Saturday, July 14th. I'm Justin Castelli. This is All About Your Benjamins, and this is your weekly mixtape and weekend review video. When I sat down to kind of put together this week's list, to be honest with you, I didn't think there was going to be very much to cover. I thought it'd be a quick one, but as I was working through my Slack feed of articles I sent to myself, there were quite a few, so let's get to them. First off, President Trump announced his choice for the open seat for Justice Anthony Kennedy on the Supreme Court, and his choice was Brett Kavanaugh. So he is a conservative, would move the court more to the right. So we'll see what happens with that. The next step would be for him to be confirmed, but we now know who President Trump's candidate for the open seat on the Supreme Court is. You didn't think we'd go a week without talking about tariffs, so earlier in the week we announced a $200 billion tariff on Chinese goods, including luggage, tires, dog leashes, baseball gloves, cell phone computer components, TV components. I actually saw some comments on my social media feed from people who never talk about finance and econ, saying that these tariffs had gone too far because their pocketbooks were going to be costing too much and their new purses were going to be more expensive. So we're starting to see some of these tariffs and this conversation trickle down to products that the average consumer is going to notice more. So that's in the news again. Markets reacted as they normally do. It's believed that this time China's not going to be able to come back and match them. Pretty much every time we've announced a new round of tariffs, they've matched us. I think it was 50 billion, they matched us 50 billion. This time it's believed they're not going to be able to match us. So I don't know if this is the straw that breaks the camel's back and gets things moving, but that was the news this week about tariffs. I'm sure there'll be more about it coming up in the coming weeks. This week also, all of the NATO officials, so the president and 28 of the other world leaders that make up NATO met in Brussels. They talked about the things that NATO talks about, but one point of discussion that came up quite a bit and President Trump was very vocal about is that he suggested, and apparently, I don't know if this is true, we'll see, apparently NATO members are going to increase their military spending from 2% to 4%. So the goal has always been to spend 2% on military expenses, and Trump suggested that they bump it up to 4%, doubling it. So that was his big talking point. He also ruffled a few feathers, first off saying Germany was captive of Russia, and he also suggested that the UK's Prime Minister Theresa May should have listened to him on how to handle Brexit. So definitely went over there, maybe accomplished some good things, but also ruffled some feathers, which is kind of the way things go right now. Moving to some more economic news, there's inflation measurements released this week. So for the second straight month, CPIs, of the Consumer Price Index we've talked about before on the Whiteboard series, ticked up a little bit. So inflation's going up, and the article that I've highlighted in this week's notes talks about how the wage raises we're seeing, the increases in wages, are being offset by this increased inflation. So while we're seeing wages go up, inflation's going up with it, and we're really not improving, and in some cases actually not keeping pace with inflation. So this is important because inflation is the silent killer of a financial plan. It's why we save and it's why we invest. We need to keep up with inflation, and there's a very good analogy that is mentioned in the article about the boiling a frog. You put a frog in of water and bring it to raise it to boiling temperature. They're not going to jump out, they're going to die, versus if you just throw them in a boiling pot, they're going to jump back out. So it kind of just silently happens. We don't really notice it, and you look back 10 years and things are a lot more expensive. So we've talked about the importance of inflation and how the Federal Reserve is watching it, trying to keep it close to 2%. So I will continue to mention this and talk about inflation because it's very important to the planning process, and it's a big part of why we do the things we do, especially investing in your planning. So we'll keep an eye on this and keep mentioning it whenever there's something to talk about. Back to the political landscape, the Mueller probe this week indicted 12 Russians for hacking into the DNC and tampering with Hillary Clinton's campaign. So this has been an ongoing saga. Not a lot of excitement around this, but I thought it was worth mentioning because who knows where this goes. I think we've all accepted that Russia's had a bigger impact on our election than they should have. To what extent, we really don't know quite yet, but nonetheless, their fingerprints are all over it. So we have 12 Russians that are indicted for hacking into the DNC and tampering with Hillary Clinton's campaign. Speaking of markets and how those events impact the markets this week in the U.S. ended on a high note. The Dow's back above 25,000. I picked that out because that's the one we hear about most. Most people know about the Dow, but you've got the S&P doing well, the NASDAQ, which is more tech heavy as well. I bring this up just because part of the planning process is the markets, and I also want to highlight I'm going to be writing a blog post hopefully this weekend, but early next week at the latest. Back above 25,000 on the Dow is kind of the high end of this range that we've been trading through. So I'm going to write about ranges and how they can be frustrating and the emotions that come with that in investing, but we're at the top end of the range. For most of the year when we get up here, we see the market come back down. Now will that happen again? Who knows? But just a little observation for you, and maybe setting some reasonable expectations that don't be surprised if we hang out around 25,000 on the Dow for a while and it comes back down, just because that's what we've been doing so far this year. Moving to my beloved Twitter, my favorite form of social media. They announced they're going to be cleaning up some of the accounts out there. They're getting rid of about 6% of accounts that have been blocked, and they've been blocked for various reasons, whether it be sharing misleading information, sharing bad links, or just overall bad behavior. So they're going to be cleaning up. Initially, if you follow the stock, it had a negative reaction to that because they're losing the daily active users that are what some of Wall Street looks for as far as metrics, how many people are using on a daily basis. But I think in the grand scheme of things, it's going to make the experience better, and I think quality over quantity is more important. So I think this is a good move by Twitter. I'm happy to see it. You all out there know how much I love Twitter and what it's done for me and my career and writing and growing and networking with advisors. So anytime they make an improvement, I'm happy to see that. And finally, going to end on some exciting news. I'm sure everybody was following the wild boar soccer team over in Thailand that was trapped in the cave. Well, this week, all 12 of the soccer players and their coach were finally removed. Unfortunately, this rescue mission did not go without any casualties. There was one Thai SEAL, and I want to make sure I say his name so he gets credit for it. And I'm going to butcher it, but I'm going to go with Saman Gunan. He died earlier in the process while he was trying to strategically place air tanks throughout the cave for the rescue mission. He ironically ran out of oxygen and passed away. So great to see the young boys out. Many heroes in this, from the coach to the Thai SEALs to everybody involved. Glad to see all those young boys safe and back in the hospital and getting better. And we're ending on soccer, so tomorrow, Sunday, is the World Cup Championship. We've got Croatia versus France. Roman and Leo have picked their sides, and for some reason, I don't know why, I'm going with Croatia. But I am excited to watch Mbappe on France play one more time. If you haven't seen him play, he's a 19-year-old phenom, having numbers not quite to Pele's level, but comparisons are being made at this point because of his age and how well he's done in this World Cup. So we will be watching that. And that is everything I have for this week's mixtape. So by now you know the closing drill. Be sure to check out all of the blog posts below, some of the best posts I found from around the week, and a couple that are a little bit older, but stumbled across them this week. So check out those posts, and as always, be sure to subscribe to the blog, to the podcast, to the YouTube channel to stay up to date on everything all about your Benjamins. Don't forget to do all of that. I got some good episodes coming up on the podcast. Really excited about that. And I also gave it a makeover, new cover art, redoing some of the wording so it's much more clear. So I'm excited about the direction that that's going. So I will let you guys get going. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you in the next episode.